This video assumes that you've never installed the Arduino IDE and also that you've never used GitHub. If you've done those two things before, then you can skip this video. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to download the LIBCM firmware. Now there will be a link here and you will get to this link right here. Now this is a lot going on. You don't really need to look at any of this here except for two things. One is that there's two different versions that you might want to download. Main is the oldest version, which is going to be the most tested. And so here's the main branch. And then we also have the pre-release branch, which still pre-release it's guaranteed to work in my car at least, and should work in your car as well, but it's not going to be as thoroughly tested. The JTS in work, JTS, that's my initials, it's in work. You should never install this version, so don't install this version. As of the filming of this video, the FOMOCO kits must use the pre-release version. I haven't actually pulled all of the code down into main yet. So we're going to assume that you're installing FOMOCO. If you're installing the 5Ah G3, the process is exactly the same. Regardless of which one of these you choose, pre-release or main, we're going to click on code and then download zip. Once we do that, we're basically done with this page. Each time you change this selection here, when you now select code and download, it's going to download different code. If that wasn't obvious. Okay, now that those have finished, those are going to by default install in your downloads folder. If you don't know where that is, you can hit go and then downloads. In this case, we're going to be using pre-release, so we'll just delete the main. This is very important. You have to actually unzip this folder. In Windows, if you double click on this, it will open what looks like a Windows File Explorer and you can play around in it, but the code won't build. So be really sure. In Windows, you have to right click and then say extract to location or whatever. In macOS, you just have to double click on it here. By default, macOS will actually unzip this for you automatically. And so we have pre-release here, and there's a lot in this folder because this is all of the documentation, all of the electronics, all of the firmware, the circuit boards, the hardware, the mechanicals, the trays, test fixtures, everything for LIBCM is in this folder we just downloaded. Now we are just going to be in the firmware folder, and then even more specifically, we're going to just be in this MVP folder. Quick aside here, in version 0.9.2 and previous, we're going to have in the firmware folder an MVP folder and then a bunch of files. The only two files we're going to access are these mvp.ino and config.h. So that's how it is right now in 0.9.2 as of this recording. The next version, 0.9.3, is going to be slightly different. So when we go to the firmware folder, it's not going to be called MVP, it's going to be called firmware LIBCM. And when we open that, it's just going to be the two files you access and then a source folder with all of the files inside of it. So that'll be in the next version, but as of this recording, it is not in there yet. Because we're only modifying these two files, this just makes it a lot easier. For now, you're going to have to just find these two files in this folder. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open config.h. Now, even though I just showed you to open this in TextEdit, I don't recommend actually editing this in TextEdit because it's kind of hard to read what is and what is not selected out. So my recommendation, this is optional, is to go and download some kind of actual text-based editor. Sublime Text is what I use for macOS. There are plenty of versions for Windows as well. Notepad++, for example, is what I use in Windows. We're going to go back to our downloads folder. And here is Sublime Text. We'll go ahead and unzip that. So I recommend placing Sublime Text in your applications folder. And to do that, we need to first make a new Finder window and then hit go to applications. And then now we're going to take and just drag Sublime Text into your applications folder. And once we've done that, we can double click on Sublime Text. It's going to pop up. It's probably going to give you this warning saying that it was downloaded. Do you want to open it? If you don't have the option to open this, you can click cancel and then right click and say open here. And now you're basically telling macOS, hey, I kind of have an idea what I'm doing, and it will give you this open option there. Once we've done that here, we're going to just move that out of the way. And we're going to go into the pre-release folder here, firmware, MVP, config.h. And now we're going to drag this into Sublime Text. And so you can see the difference here is that now the text is color-coded based on the parameters that you've selected. So specifically anything you've commented out, which the computer is going to ignore by having these 2 forward slashes, that means, hey, this is just for the users, just don't interpret this at all. That's going to be gray. Okay, so now that we can actually read this code, we're gonna actually drill down, and all this stuff at the beginning you can skip here. It's just the firmware version build date. We're gonna go to hardware specific configuration. So at this point, LIBCM works with a bunch of hardware, and it can't really tell what hardware is there. So you as the customer have to tell it, hey, I have this battery, and there's this many of them in series, and I have this grid charger, and I have this installed. So the first thing we're gonna do is we have these hardware specific configurations, and if you read, these are the instructions right here, and I'll just summarize them here. We need to choose exactly one option from each group. And by choose, it means we need to uncomment whatever it is that we are. So for this example, I'm gonna be showing you the 5 amp hour G3 first, and then we'll go and do the FOMOCO. 5 amp hour G3, I'm gonna delete these 2 forward slashes. We have just told LIBCM when we upload this code that you are connected to a 5 amp hour G3 battery pack. And I have helpful notes here too. This one is, if you're not sure, you probably have this battery. I suspect that most people who install FOMOCO are gonna know that they've installed FOMOCO. Next, we're gonna choose how many cells we have in series, and all 5 amp hour G3 kits are 48S, so pretty easy option. If you have 5 amp hour G3, that's 48S. Next option's also very easy because with the 5 amp hour G3 kit, this is the only option you can select. And these notes here are all here. It says all 5 amp hour G3 kits use this option. So there's that option. And now we need to actually select which current hack we have installed. Most LIBCM customers, to my knowledge, have installed this current hack PCB. This is not a part of LIBCM. This is a physical piece of hardware that's installed inside of the MCM. It's sold by @Bulldog on Insight Central. And most people select 40%, so you would select that option. If this option doesn't match the actual what's installed in the car, then you're gonna get P codes when you do hard assist or regen. So make sure you have this set correctly. The final hardware option right now is the LCD, which one you have connected. So LIBCM comes with the 4x20 LCD display, and it does currently work now with LI display as well. This is a product that's still earlier in its development. It's not included with the LIBCM kit, but if you are interested in that, you can contact user at Natalia on insightcentral.net, and she can get you up to speed. She's actually writing this version, this part of the code. So if you have her firmware running on the screen, you can basically enable this, disable that. I have a note in here that says you probably shouldn't use both of these at the same time. You could have timing issues. So if you do use both at the same time, you might get issues. And anyway, so we, in this case, have a 4x20 display connected. So this is a valid configuration option here. We have the 5 amp hour G3, stack is 48, grid charger is not 1500, set current hack 40%, and then LCD 4x20 is connected. So we've configured the hardware. You must configure these. If you don't configure them, the code won't compile, and I'll show you that in the next section if you have errors. Right now we're gonna just try and get the code uploaded for the first time. So the next section is voltage spoofing. And my recommendation for the initial install is to skip this section entirely. The default values will work in all cars. I will note there are some notes here about 60S. In the 60S configuration, you must use this option. So even if you get a little bit down the road and you want to start playing around with this, you can't. 60S doesn't support these options. Instead, it has this other option down here that 48S ignores completely. So the voltage spoofing works very differently between 48S and 60S, and that just has to do with how much higher the 60S voltage is. The 60S voltage is about 100 volts higher than the nominal OEM voltage. So there are quite a few differences in what hardware things have to happen. So 48S, you can choose either of these 4 options. In 60S, you can choose these options here. They're explained in here, but again, for now, I would just ignore them for your first time. Firmware settings, same thing. These values, by default, they'll work in any car, so you don't need to play around with them. Once you get a little more confident in how LIBCM works, you can come in and play with these values if you want to. And then the last section, debug parameters, you really should never be editing these because these are for me. I mean, unless you really know what you're doing. So ultimately then, the first time you install, the only section you need to set up is this hardware specific configuration. So we've now set this up. We're gonna go ahead and save this. So file, save, and then we can close this. We don't need to, but we will. Next, we're gonna launch the Arduino application, which we need to install. So let's go get Arduino. We've now configured the code, but we need to figure out how we're gonna install this on the computer. So we're gonna go to arduino.cc, and we're gonna download the Arduino software here. So we're gonna click on software, and then There is a new Arduino IDE here. It's called Arduino IDE. It's pretty buggy right now. I actually tried filming a video showing you how to use this, but I ran into so many bugs that I'm not using it for now. It's still, even though it's on version 2.2.1, I think it's still a sub version 1. It's a 0.x in my book because it does not work well. I ran into tons of errors. So we're gonna scroll down to the legacy IDE, which is 1.8.x right now, and we're going to download that. So we're going to download the macOS version because we're installing on macOS here. Okay, so now that that is downloaded, we're going to once again, we'll make a new window, go to our downloads folder. There is our Arduino legacy IDE. And then we will drag this into your applications folder. Now we're going to launch the Arduino app, and you're going to get a message here saying that it's downloaded from the internet. And depending on how tightly locked down your macOS is, you might not even get this option to open. So if that option's not there, click cancel and then right click it. This tells macOS that you kind of have some idea what you're doing. So if you right click this and say open, it's like, oh wow, it's a power user. And now it will give you the open option here if you didn't get it before. So once this launches, now we have our Arduino window here. Here's our just blank sketch. This does nothing. So we need to actually now open the firmware for LIBCM. And so to do that, we're going to go back to this MVP folder, find mvp.ino, and then we're going to drag it into Arduino. And once we do that, we're going to see this is the actual code that Arduino is running. So we need to now actually tell Arduino what it's talking to. And so to do that, we're going to go up to the Tools menu here, and then we're going to define what this is. And the default option is an Arduino Uno, which is not what LIBCM is. We need to come in here and select board, and there might be subfolders here, and we need to find where it says Arduino Mega or Arduino Mega 2560 and select that option. So you can see now that we've selected board, and we have the Mega 2560 checked off there. If you don't select this option, it won't work. You're going to get errors. Next, we need to actually connect to the hardware. So at this point, you need to plug in the USB cable, which is behind the passenger seat. If you don't do that, then we won't be able to find the hardware. So we'll click on Tools and then Port. And then once we're in port, it's going to be a USB modem. So you're always, if your computer has Bluetooth, it's always going to have this Bluetooth incoming port. In this case, you're going to search for USB modem here. Now, if you don't see this USB modem and you've plugged it and unplugged it and you've tried it, my recommendation is always going to be to quit and relaunch Arduino. Arduino IDE is not great. The new version is really bad. The old version has some interesting quirks and features. So we have our modem selected now, which is basically how we're going to upload this code. And so what we need to do is we have the Mega 2560 and our USB modem, good. So now all we need to do is upload this code. Before we upload this code, I do have a recommendation, which is to go into the preferences and then make sure you check off the show verbose output during compilation and upload. This is just going to give you a ton of information as these files process. And that way, if you run into issues, you can send me this data. It makes it much easier to troubleshoot if I can tell exactly why the firmware wouldn't install. So now that we've enabled that output, we're going to hit the upload button here. And you can see this verbose output here. It's telling you everything that's going on. You don't need to really know any of this. The orange stuff is fine. This is basically saying, hey, look, we're uploading now. We're writing that flash, and then we're going to verify what we wrote to make sure that it was written correctly. And once you've done that, you're going to get this AVR dude is done. Thank you. So at this point, we have successfully installed this firmware here. If you didn't get here, my first recommendation is going to be to copy all of this code out of here, and you can drag it up slowly like a person hitting a rock, or you can just hit Command A or Control A in Windows and that will select it all, and then you can copy it, Command C, and then you can paste it into a text edit document. Again, you only need to do this if you run into issues and I need to troubleshoot it. You can save this file to your desktop and then send it to me. In this case, we didn't have any problems. So the next thing we should probably do is make sure that LIBCM is ready to go. So to do that, we're going to open the serial monitor. By default, the first time you install this, it's going to be 9600 baud. So we need to change the speed, and LIBCM uses the 115/200 baud setting. And once we do that, in a second or two here, we should get a welcome screen here. I recommend checking the show timestamp option, and that way whenever data is sent, it's going to show the timestamp as well. That's really good for debug stuff. So once we get this display message here, we've verified that yes, in fact, we do have the firmware on LIBCM, and we should probably make sure these options agree with what you have installed. So the first here is the revision of the hardware, which is either Rev C or Rev D right now. And then you have selected a 5 amp hour G3 kit with 48 cells in series with no voltage spoofing, it's off, and you don't have a heater installed. The heater installation is automatically determined. So at this point, if you get to here, we can now test to make sure that the grid charger is working properly. And so what we'll do is we'll plug the grid charger in. You do need to make sure the IMA switch is on before you plug the grid charger in. So we will now plug the grid charger in, and you'll see that if everything is happy, that we're going to start charging the battery. And so it's going to be giving you all the cell voltages here. I'll go ahead and unplug the grid charger now. So we're gonna just kind of look at some of the common issues that I've seen people have. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna introduce a hardware error. And this hardware error is that I've actually unplugged the temperature sensors. And so now if we try and plug the grid charger into grid charge, it's going to say, hey, I can't tell what the temperature is. And so it's not going to grid charge. So if you run into these issues, you don't need to be able to interpret this code, but you do need to gather it, which is what we're doing now. Once you've replicated the issue of whatever issue you're running into, if you come in here, you can select all of this text again. You can either drag select it, or again, you can hit Command A, copy, paste this into a text file, and then save it here. And sending me these debug files, both from the upload process if you had issues uploading, and then from the actual code is installed, very useful to me. It makes it much easier to troubleshoot these. So please do that if you run into issues. And also if you want to record a YouTube video of like what the car is doing along with these, I would love that as well. It really makes debug easier if everyone's on the same page about what I need to debug your issue. So now let's show what happens if you choose invalid options. So we're gonna go back to the config.h file here, and we're going to go back to the default values here, which is that none of these are selected. So if you just download this code and you don't set up config.h and you try to install this firmware and you have verbose output on, you're gonna get a bunch of errors. And the last error is the only one you need to read. Don't start up here, always start at the bottom. And it's gonna say error, grid charger type is not specified in config.h. So I've added a lot of these guardrails now for the user. So this is basically telling you open up config.h and you need to specify the grid charger type. So in this case, we will specify the grid charger. I'm gonna say it's 1500 watts. It's not, but we're gonna say that. And if you notice now, you're gonna basically, if you keep trying to upload this code, you're gonna keep getting these errors until it has a valid configuration. So here it's saying the pack size, you need to either select 48 or 60S. And so in this case, I'm gonna select 48S and 5 amp hour G3 and 40% current hack. So we've now selected a value for everything. This is not a valid configuration because the 5 amp hour G3 kit does not work with the 1500 watt grid charger. So we're gonna save this file, make sure you do that, and then we're gonna try and upload this again. And it's gonna say, hey, look, you selected a grid charger selection that doesn't work. 5 amp hour G3 LIBCM kits don't support the 1500 watt charger. So I've added these guardrails just in case you select the wrong option. These are compile time things, things we can figure out before we install the firmware, but we actually have runtime things as well. So let's say we're installing a FOMOCO kit that has a 60S pack. So basically what I'm saying is that I have a 60S FOMOCO pack, but actually what I'm putting it on right now is going to be a 48S pack. So this will build successfully and install, but then when LIBCM starts, it's going to first see how many cells are there, and it's going to show you an error if it doesn't match what it sees. LIBCM can tell the number of cells there, but there are some safety issues where you as the user need to tell it what it should see. So this code is just uploaded, and as you can hear in the background, it's now beeping. So this illegal configuration, we have a runtime configuration that's illegal. And so that beep is not going to turn off, and that's an indication to you that something is not configured correctly. Now, if you want to figure out what that something is, you can again open the serial monitor, and that's going to reset LIBCM. And then as soon as it turns on, it's probably going to spit out the error here, and it says, yep, sure, error, measured cell count disagrees with the user specified cell count in config.h. What this is telling you is that, hey, you selected 48S, I found 60 cells, or you selected 60 cells and I found 48. So at this point, this beep will not turn off, and that's telling you you need to fix this problem, whatever it is. If LIBCM is beeping, something bad is happening, and so you don't, specifically, you don't turn the car on. If you have the grid charger in, you should unplug the grid charger, etc. So as long as LIBCM is beeping, it's not happy, don't try and drive the car. You need to figure out what the problem is, and typically the first thing it's going to tell you is, hey, here's what the problem is. And if this doesn't make sense to you, what the problem is, again, copy this text, open TextEdit, paste it, or Notepad in Windows, save it on the desktop, send it to me. I need this debug information. I can't help you figure out what your problem is if I don't have this debug info. So let's go ahead and put valid code back on here so that the beep will go away. We're going to once again open config.h, and we're going to say that this is a 48S pack here, and then we're going to upload that. And so now once again, we are here in the serial monitor and everything looks happy. Notice this old text here before is still there. That's because this serial monitor window doesn't really clear by itself. So whenever you see this LIBCM version, that means that, hey, this is a new session right here. If you want to, between sessions, you can hit this clear output window. And then I will typically, after I've cleared the output, I'll do $boot, and that will reboot LIBCM. You can find all of these options, by the way, by typing $help. It's the first thing LIBCM tells you if everything is successful hardware-wise. When it turns on, it's going to say version, date, help, if you want help. Here are the commands that are supported. So this list will grow in time. You can probably ignore it completely now, although I might tell you some debug things if you are running into issues. So yeah, hopefully you got the firmware installed. If not, again, please send me this debug data. Probably want to name it more logical things. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and close out of all of these and go drive the car.